Mara stood at the edge of the training field with her backpack hanging from one shoulder. The morning sun was rising slowly over the New Mexico mountains, turning the sky a soft orange. The air felt cool, clean, and a little sharp. She could feel her heartbeat in her chest, steady but heavy. This was the first day of the mountain rescue training course, and she already wondered if she had made a mistake by signing up. She looked at the other trainees around her. Most of them seemed confident. Some laughed with each other, adjusting their backpacks and tightening their hiking boots. A few stretched their legs, preparing for the day's climb. They looked strong and used to rough outdoor life. Mara felt small among them, like she did not belong here. She was not weak, but she was not experienced like the others. She worked in a small outdoor shop in her town and had always dreamed of doing something bigger, something brave. When she saw the announcement for this training, she thought maybe it was time to push herself. But now, facing the tall mountains and the long trail ahead, she felt unsure. The instructors moved to the front of the group. Among them was one man who stood out not because he was loud or commanding, but because of how quiet he was. He was tall, calm, and carried himself with a kind of quiet strength. His name was Elias Greyhawk. He was part of an Apache search and rescue group and had joined as a guest instructor. Mara had heard the others whisper about him earlier. They said he had an incredible sense of direction, that he could read the land like a map, and he could stay calm in any dangerous situation. He did not look intimidating. He looked steady, like someone who knew the mountains better than he knew the city. Elias scanned the trainees with slow, thoughtful eyes. When his gaze passed over Mara, she straightened a little, as if his calm presence made her want to stand stronger. But he nodded lightly, offering no judgment, only acknowledgement. That small gesture eased her nerves just a bit. The lead instructor began explaining the day's challenge. They would hike up a steep trail, do basic climb training, practice reading the ground, and learn how to move safely with full gear. It did not sound too difficult when spoken aloud, but Mara knew that the reality would be different. The mountains were not gentle with beginners. The group set off shortly after. The trail started as a simple dirt path, weaving between tall juniper trees and rocky ground. Mara tried to keep up with the others, but her backpack felt heavier than she remembered. She had packed everything the training required: water, rope, first aid, emergency supplies, but now it felt like she carried a whole world on her back. She kept adjusting the straps, hoping the weight would shift and become easier, but it did not. As they walked, the trail grew steeper. Loose stones rolled under their boots. The sun climbed higher, warming the air. Mara's breath became short, her legs heavy. She tried not to show her struggle, but she knew anyone watching could see she was not moving as easily as the others. At one point, the trail narrowed and turned into a sharp incline. The instructors stopped the group and explained that they would now begin rock ascent practice. It was not a full climb, just a steep, rocky face that required both hands and feet. Most of the trainees seemed excited. Mara's stomach tightened. She stood at the bottom of the rocky incline and looked up. It was not a cliff, but it was tall enough to make her nervous. The rocks were rough and uneven. Some parts stuck out sharply, while others were worn smooth by years of weather. The height seemed manageable to everyone else, but to her, it looked like a wall that could stop her completely. One by one, the trainees began climbing. They moved fast, gripping rocks with confidence. Mara watched them closely, trying to learn from their movements, but the more she watched, the more overwhelmed she felt. When it was finally her turn, she took a small breath and lifted her foot to the first stable rock. At first, things went better than she expected. She managed to climb a few feet, using handholds to pull herself upward. But soon, her arms started to tremble, and her breath turned shaky. She reached for another rock, but her grip slipped. She caught herself quickly, but the slip sent a wave of fear through her. The rocks above her looked too high, too far. Her pack felt like it was dragging her backward. Her right hand clung to a rock, but her left hand hung in the air, searching for a hold she could not reach. Her vision blurred for a moment, as panic settled into her chest. She whispered to herself, barely loud enough for anyone to hear, "It's too hard, too much for me." Her voice sounded small and defeated, carried away by the wind along the rocks. Below her, Elias had been watching her climb. He did not shout. He did not rush toward her. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, until he stood close enough for her to hear him clearly. His voice was calm, gentle, steady like the mountains themselves. "Then use both hands," he said softly. The words were simple. Not a command. Not a judgment. Just guidance. Mara blinked, confused at first. She knew she was trying to climb with one hand at the moment, but the meaning behind his words felt larger. She looked down at Elias, and he lifted a hand slightly, showing her how to shift her weight, how to steady herself, how to engage both hands instead of letting fear freeze one. Her left hand found a rock. Her fingers curled around it. It felt solid. She felt her body pull forward, not backward. She took a slow breath, using both hands now, gripping the rocks with new focus. Her feet found better footing. She pressed forward. One move, then another. Her breath steadied. With every small movement, her confidence returned just a little. She could hear the wind, the rustle of leaves below, and the sound of her own breathing, but she could also hear Elias's quiet presence behind her. He did not speak again. He simply stayed nearby, making sure she felt safe enough to keep climbing. Mara climbed slowly but steadily, using both hands, placing her feet carefully. Her arms still shook, but now she was moving, not trapped. The top felt closer each time she lifted herself. She did not think about the rest of the trainees or the height below her. She only thought about the next small step upward. When she finally reached the top, she pulled herself onto the flat surface and sat down, breathing hard. Her arms felt like jelly, but her heart felt strangely light. For the first time since the training began, she felt like maybe she did belong here. Maybe she was stronger than she believed. The other trainees cheered lightly when they saw she made it. Mara gave them a tired smile. But what mattered more was the quiet nod she saw from Elias below. It was small, but it carried more meaning than words. It told her she had earned this small victory herself. For the rest of the hike, Mara stayed near the middle of the group. She still struggled, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt like she was fighting alone. She had learned something important, something simple but powerful. When things felt too hard, it did not mean she had to give up. It meant she had to use everything she had. As they walked deeper into the mountains, she repeated the phrase silently, like a promise to herself. Use both hands. The mountain air felt cooler as the group continued their training. After the rocky climb, everyone took a short break under the shade of tall juniper trees. Mara sat on a flat stone, trying to steady her breathing. Her arms still trembled a little, but not from fear this time, it was from effort. She felt proud, even if only quietly inside herself. Elias stood a short distance away, checking the group's progress. He watched the trainees with calm, observant eyes. He did not speak unless necessary. But when he did, people listened. There was something trustworthy about the way he moved and talked, as if he understood the land and the people walking on it. The lead instructor called out that they would now continue deeper into the training route. The next part would focus on reading the ground and learning to move safely across uneven terrain. Mara lifted her backpack again. It still felt heavy, but the earlier fear had loosened its grip on her mind. They began walking, and the trail changed slowly. The ground grew rougher, with sharper stones and dry branches scattered across the path. The group traveled in a long line. Some were fast, some slow. Mara stayed in the middle, keeping her pace steady. Elias walked near the back, watching everyone, rather than leading from the front. It seemed to be his way, quiet support, not loud direction. As they walked, Mara found herself able to notice more things around her. She noticed how the sunlight flickered through the leaves overhead, creating moving patterns on the dirt. She noticed the slight shift in the air when they entered shadier parts of the forest. She noticed how the trail curved gently left or right, shaped by weather and time. The lead instructor stopped the group near a patch of land covered with tracks, fallen twigs, and soft dirt. He explained that reading the ground was a key skill in rescue work. You had to notice small signs, footprints, broken branches, areas of pressed grass, or tiny stones moved from their usual place. These could show where a missing person had walked, or where the safest path was. Many trainees bent down, studying the dirt with interest. Mara tried too, but found it confusing. Everything looked the same to her: the dirt, the leaves, the footprints. It was hard to tell which marks were important. Elias stepped beside them, crouching silently. He pointed to a narrow section of dirt, where the soil looked pushed in. It was a trail of light steps, barely visible, unless one looked very closely. "Someone passed here this morning," he said softly. The trainees looked at each other, surprised. Mara leaned closer. She still could not see what he meant. Elias noticed her confusion. He moved slightly so she could see better. "Look for the patterns," he said. "The ground always remembers." Mara focused. Slowly, the small details started to appear. The soil was flattened in a thin line. A few leaves were turned upside down, showing lighter patches. A tiny stone had rolled a short distance. They were small things, but once she noticed them, the trail became clear. Elias nodded at her, as if he could tell she finally understood. His guidance was gentle, not demanding. Mara felt encouraged. The group continued, practicing on different patches of ground. Some parts were easier than others. Mara made mistakes, but she also improved a little each time. She learned to trust her eyes more and not rush. After an hour, the trail led them to a steep downward slope with loose rocks. The descent looked tricky. Some trainees moved carefully, stepping slowly. A few slipped slightly and had to regain balance. Mara's heartbeat picked up again. She remembered her earlier climb and the fear she felt when she almost slipped. But then she remembered the simple advice: use both hands. It was not just for climbing. It meant giving full attention, using full focus, not letting fear freeze one part of herself. She moved down the slope with slow, careful steps. Whenever she felt unstable, she touched a rock or branch for support. Her movements were awkward at first, but they became steadier as she continued. Her fear did not disappear completely, but it no longer controlled her. When she reached the bottom safely, she exhaled in relief. Elias passed by her quietly, offering a small nod again. The gesture warmed her inside. It felt like recognition, not praise, but acknowledgement of effort. The group gathered near a clearing for lunch. Everyone sat on the ground or on fallen logs, taking out sandwiches or energy bars. Some trainees chatted loudly about the climb, comparing who slipped the least. Others rested in silence. Mara ate quietly, grateful for the break. Her legs were tired, but not painfully so. She felt more comfortable now than she had that morning. A few feet away, Elias sat alone beneath a tree, mending a small tear in his glove. His movements were slow and precise, as if everything he did carried focus and patience. Mara wondered how long he had lived and worked in the mountains. She wondered what he had seen in his years of rescue work. But she did not try to talk to him. She felt too shy and did not want to disturb him. After lunch, training resumed. This time they practiced moving through narrow paths filled with obstacles. Some parts required stepping over fallen logs, some required squeezing between rocks, and others required lifting the backpack overhead. The goal was not speed but safe, smooth movement. Mara struggled at first, especially when the path required bending under branches. Her backpack kept catching on twigs. She felt annoyed with herself but kept going. After a while, she found a rhythm. Bend, step, lift, duck, slow. She noticed Elias observing everyone again. When a trainee moved too fast and almost twisted his ankle, Elias stepped in immediately, showing him how to shift weight safely. When another trainee hesitated at a narrow section, Elias guided her through with a quiet, reassuring tone. His presence seemed to calm people. As the afternoon went on, clouds gathered in the sky. The air grew cooler, and a soft wind began blowing through the trees. The lead instructor decided it was time to head toward their temporary camp before the weather worsened. The walk to the campsite was longer than Mara expected. The trail grew uneven again, and the wind carried dust that stung her eyes. She blinked several times, trying to clear her vision. Her backpack felt heavier the longer she walked, and her shoulders began to ache, but she kept moving, telling herself she could do this. Elias walked near the back again. Occasionally, he would pause, looking behind them or into the trees, as if checking the environment. His awareness was constant, never rushed, never careless. At one point, the trail curved around a cluster of sharp rocks. The wind grew stronger, almost pushing the group sideways. A few trainees struggled to keep balance. Mara felt her feet slip slightly on loose pebbles. She steadied herself by placing a hand on a nearby rock. Elias approached gently, not in a rush. "Small steps," he said. "Stay close to the inside of the trail." Mara followed his advice, taking shorter steps, keeping her body low and her eyes on the ground. Her balance improved immediately. The fear inside her eased again. They finally reached the campsite, a flat area with dry soil, surrounded by trees that offered some shelter from the wind. Tents were already prepared by other instructors earlier in the morning. Everyone dropped their backpacks with relieved sighs. Mara sat down on a patch of grass, stretching her legs. She felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from effort, not defeat. She looked around at the group. Some were still energetic, others lay on the ground, exhausted, but all seemed satisfied with the day's progress. Elias walked past the trainees, checking that everyone was safe and uninjured. When he reached Mara's spot, he paused for a moment. "You did well today," he said quietly. Mara looked up, surprised. She had not expected him to speak to her. "Thank you," she replied softly. "It is not about being fast," he continued. "It is about being steady." Those simple words carried weight. Mara nodded. She understood. She was not the strongest or the quickest, but she was learning to be steady, to keep going even when it felt hard. As the sun began to set and the group settled in for the evening, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a growing confidence deep inside her. She did not know what challenges tomorrow would bring, but she felt more prepared now. She had made it through today, and she remembered the advice that kept her moving whenever fear tried to stop her. Use both hands. The night passed quietly in the small training camp. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and the air grew colder as the stars filled the sky. Mara lay inside her tent, listening to the faint sounds of the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of the wind felt new to her. She had never slept in the mountains before, and even though she was tired, her mind stayed awake for a long time. She thought about the day she had just survived the climb, the rocky paths, the heavy backpack that kept pulling her backwards. She also remembered Elias's steady voice and the simple advice that kept echoing in her head. She did not know why his words stayed with her, but they did. It felt like a light guiding her through the fear. Eventually, she fell asleep. And when morning arrived, she woke to the sound of voices outside her tent. The sky was still dim, a pale gray, and the sun had not yet climbed over the hills. Mara stepped out, stretching her arms and feeling a slight ache in her muscles. The air was cold enough to make her breath visible. Some trainees were already awake, preparing their gear and warming their hands near a small cooking fire. Others looked sleepy, rubbing their eyes and moving slowly. The instructors stood together, planning the day's activities. Mara spotted Elias near the edge of the camp, checking ropes and safety tools. He moved with calm purpose, as if he had done this 1,000 times. After breakfast, the instructors gathered everyone together. Today's main focus would be weather navigation and moving through unstable ground. The sky was darker than before, hinting that conditions might change. That meant the training would be more challenging, but it would also feel more real. As the group started walking, the wind picked up. It was not strong, but it carried a sharpness that felt different from the day before. The air smelled like distant rain, even though the sky had not fully opened. The trail led them toward higher ground, where they would learn how to move safely during a sudden weather shift. Mara kept her steps steady. She took slower breaths, trying not to waste energy. Her backpack still felt heavy, but she had stopped letting that thought control her. She reminded herself to stay focused, step by step. The trail curved through a narrow pass between tall rocks. The ground here was uneven, covered with loose stones. A few trainees walked too fast and slipped slightly. Mara remembered Elias's advice from before: small steps, stay close to the inner side of the trail. She followed that pattern again, and it helped. Elias stayed near the middle of the group today, watching how everyone moved. He did not speak loudly. Instead, he quietly adjusted people's footing and showed them where to place their weight. His presence felt steady, like a quiet guardian walking with them. As they climbed higher, the sky darkened more. The wind grew cooler. The lead instructor stopped and told the group they would now practice reading the weather with small signs in nature. This was important in rescue work. Storms could arrive suddenly in the mountains, and knowing the signs early could save lives. He pointed to the sky. Clouds moved lower, their shapes slowly flattening. The wind shifted direction more often. The air grew heavy, carrying a pressure that was hard to explain but easy to feel. Mara noticed that the birds nearby had quieted down, and that too was a sign. Elias stepped forward and added a few words. The mountain speaks before anything else does. You learn to listen, and it tells you when to move, when to stop, and when to wait. The trainees listened carefully. His tone was calm but meaningful. Mara felt the weight of those words. She wanted to understand the signals like he did. They continued walking until they reached a steep downhill path. The rocks here were damp, and the soil was soft. The lead instructor explained that this kind of terrain became dangerous quickly after rain. They would practice moving safely across it before the weather worsened. Mara stepped forward slowly. She placed her foot on a small rock, testing its stability. It wobbled slightly. She adjusted her position, placing more weight on her left foot instead. Her steps were shaky, but controlled. She remembered to use all her strength and not freeze when she felt uncertain. Halfway down, she slipped on a patch of damp soil. Her heart jumped, and she grabbed a rock to stop herself from falling. Her breath came fast, and fear tried to climb into her mind again. Elias moved toward her silently. His steps were stable on the same slippery ground. Breathe, he said gently. Slow, steady. You already know what to do. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. She opened them again and placed her foot carefully on a firmer patch of ground. She shifted her weight and continued downward. Elias stayed nearby until she reached the bottom safely. Once the whole group finished the descent, the wind grew stronger. The temperature dropped quickly. A chill rolled through the trees as if the mountain was warning them of something coming. The instructors decided it was time to head back, but the return path would test their skills even more. The group started climbing again, and the sky finally released a thin curtain of rain. It wasn't heavy, but just enough to make the rocks slippery and the ground softer. Mara tightened her backpack straps and moved carefully. Each step mattered. The rainwater ran down the trail, creating small streams. Mud formed under their boots, making every move harder. Some trainees complained softly, trying to stay balanced. Mara did not speak. She saved her energy for movement. Her legs began to feel tired again, and at one point she slowed down more than the others. The wind hit her in the face, making her eyes water. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on a tree branch. Elias noticed her struggle. He approached calmly and walked beside her for a while, matching her pace. Do not fight the mountain, he said softly. Move with it. Watch the ground. Listen to your steps. Mara tried to follow his advice. She looked at the ground, studying the small changes in soil and rock. She found firmer patches and stepped on them. She learned to shift her weight before committing to each step. It wasn't perfect, but it helped her stay balanced. The trail led them through a narrow path between two large boulders. The wind whistled through the gap, making it feel even colder. Mara hugged her arms close to her body, feeling the chill in her fingers. "You are doing well," Elias said quietly. "Do not doubt that." His words gave her strength. She kept moving, even when the path grew harder. The final part of the trail was the toughest. It sloped upward sharply and was covered with wet leaves and loose rocks. The rain had made everything slippery. Some trainees panicked briefly when their feet slid under them. Mara took a slow breath. She placed her hands on the rocks when needed, using them for balance. Her legs shook with effort, but she kept her focus. She remembered how she climbed the rocky face on the first day. That moment was still alive inside her. She reached the top of the slope with slow but steady movement. When she stepped onto the flatter ground, she felt relief wash over her. Her heartbeat slowed, and the tension in her body softened. Elias arrived moments later, watching her quietly. He did not need to speak. His slight nod told her everything. She had faced her fear again, and she had won again. The group returned to camp, tired but safe. The rain softened into a light mist, and the clouds started to break. The air smelled fresh, filled with earth and water. Mara sat on a rock, looking around at the green hills and darkening sky. She felt exhausted, but her heart felt stronger. She had faced slippery ground, strong winds, and fear, yet she was still standing. She looked down at her hands. They were dirty, scratched, and tired. But they were steady. She understood the meaning of the lesson more clearly now. It wasn't just about climbing or walking. It was about facing the world with full strength, full focus, and full courage. It was about using both hands. The next morning arrived with a soft golden light spreading over the mountains. The rain from the previous day had washed the air clean, leaving everything fresh. Drops of water still clung to the leaves, shining in the early sun. Mara stepped out of her tent and breathed deeply. Her muscles ached, but she felt stronger than before. Every day in the mountains was slowly shaping her, teaching her something new. Some of the trainees were already awake, stretching or warming their hands over the small fire. Others looked tired, rubbing their arms and shoulders. Today was expected to be harder, but no one knew exactly what the instructors planned. There was a quiet tension in the camp, a mixture of nerves and excitement. Elias stood at the far side of the clearing, checking safety ropes and testing the strength of the knots he tied. His movements were steady as always. Even the way he walked looked balanced. When he noticed Mara watching him, he gave a small nod. Not as a greeting, but as a silent acknowledgement of effort. After breakfast, the instructors called everyone together. Today's training would involve teamwork. They would move through rough terrain as a connected group, learning to depend on each other just as real rescue teams do. They would practice carrying equipment, guiding a tired member, and crossing natural obstacles together. Mara felt nervous again. Working alone was hard enough, but working in a group meant she had to match her pace with others and trust them. She hoped she would not slow her team down. The trainees were divided into groups of 5. Mara's group included 2 fast climbers, 1 quiet trainee, and 1 who often joked, trying to lighten the mood even on hard days. Elias was assigned as the guide for her group. When she heard this, her heartbeat quickened, though she wasn't sure why. His presence made her feel safer, but she also wanted to do well in front of him. They began walking toward a narrow valley where the terrain was more complicated. The path twisted sharply, dipped into hollows, and rose in uneven slopes. The ground was still wet from yesterday's rain, and leaves stuck to their boots. The first challenge came sooner than expected. The trail split into 2 uneven paths, one narrow but stable, the other wider but covered with slippery mud. They had to choose which one their team would take. Some trainees in the group suggested the wide path, thinking it looked easier. Mara hesitated. She remembered what she had learned the previous days. The ground often hid danger. Smooth things could be slippery, and wide spaces could be unstable. Elias watched silently, waiting for the group to decide. Mara spoke softly but clearly. "The narrow path looks safer. It has rocks for support." The group turned to her. Surprised, she made a suggestion. The joking trainee nodded. "She's right. The wide one looks messy. Elias gave Mara a small, approving look. The group took the narrow path, moving one by one. It was tight, and they had to press close to the rocks, but it was stable. Mara's breath grew steadier as they crossed it without trouble. The next challenge was more difficult. The team reached a small drop, a 3-foot dip with muddy rocks at the bottom. They had to help each other down without slipping. Elias showed them how to lower themselves backward, holding the rocks with their hands. Mara went second. Her hands were cold, and she felt her foot slide a little, but she remembered to shift her weight and move slowly. When she reached the bottom, she felt a quiet pride fill her chest. Once the whole group was safely down, they continued deeper into the valley. The trees grew thicker here, and the shadows made it harder to see the ground clearly. Birds moved through the branches above, their wings fluttering softly. At one point, the joking trainee tripped on a hidden root and stumbled forward. Mara reacted instinctively, grabbing his arm before he could fall fully. He steadied himself and laughed lightly. "Good save." Elias looked at Mara with quiet approval again. She felt warmth spread through her chest at his expression. She wasn't the weakest one anymore. She was becoming reliable. The trail grew harder as they moved on. A fallen tree lay across the path, wide enough that they had to climb over it. Elias showed them the safest way, placing both hands on the trunk, swinging one leg over, then the other. Mara followed his example. Her boots slipped slightly on the wet bark, but she kept her grip strong and managed to cross safely. Deeper into the valley, they came to a stream. The water wasn't deep, but it flowed over uneven rocks. Crossing without slipping would require focus. The group formed a chain, holding each other's arms as they stepped carefully from rock to rock. Mara felt the cold water splash against her boots. Her heart beat faster as she stepped onto a smooth stone, which shifted slightly under her weight. Elias was beside her, his hand ready but not touching, watching to make sure she was safe. "Look for the darker stones," he said softly. "They're usually more stable." She followed his advice, placing her foot on a firmer rock. Bit by bit, the team crossed to the other side. As they continued through the valley, the wind changed again. It brought a new coldness that made the trees rustle sharply. The instructors had warned them that sudden weather changes could make rescue work unpredictable. This was part of the training to stay alert. The trail ahead became more rugged. Small landslides from last night's rain had scattered loose rocks across the ground. Moving as a team became more important. They had to call out hazards, point out safe spots, and adjust their pace to match the slowest member. Mara found herself doing something she never expected. She began to help lead. She noticed a safer foothold, pointed it out to the others, and they followed. She learned to read the small shifts in the dirt, remembering Elias's words, "The ground always remembers." It became easier to see where the soil was stable and where it might give way. When they reached a steep hill, the group had to climb it together. They formed a line, each person waiting for the one in front to move safely before stepping forward. The hill was covered in damp leaves. Mara gripped roots and rocks with both hands, pulling herself upward, slowly but with determination. Her legs burned, her arms ached, and her breath came fast. Halfway up, she paused, feeling her strength weaken. She almost whispered the same words she once said on the first climb, "It's too hard," but she stopped herself. She knew better now. Elias's voice came from just behind her. "You know what to do," he said gently. She placed both hands on the next rock, tightened her grip, and pulled herself forward. Step by step, she continued. It was slow, but she reached the top safely. When she stood on the flat ground, she felt a wave of pride stronger than anything she had felt before. She had done it on her own strength, not fear. The rest of the group made it up as well. They sat for a moment to catch their breath. The view from the top of the hill opened into a wide stretch of land. From there, they could see distant trees, the curve of the valley, and the path they had already traveled. It gave Mara a sense of how far she had come. As they continued the final stretch of training for the day, Mara felt more confident walking on uneven ground. She noticed things she never used to notice: tiny broken leaves, small stones out of place, the bend of grass from recent movement. She was learning to read the land like a quiet story. By the time they returned to camp, the sun was beginning to set. The sky turned shades of gold and red, spreading warmth across the hills. The group looked exhausted but proud. They had worked together, helped each other, and learned to trust the land. Mara sat on a log, breathing slowly. Her clothes were dirty, her boots were soaked, and she felt tired all over. But it was the best kind of tired. She felt stronger, steadier, and more sure of herself. Elias passed by her and stopped briefly. "You were steady today," he said softly. Mara felt her heart warm at his words. "Thank you," she replied. "I tried." "You did more than try," he said. "You grew." As he walked away, Mara looked at her hands again. They were scratched and covered with dirt, but she felt proud of them. They had helped her climb, balance, steady others, and push forward. She knew now that every challenge she faced was shaping her. Every difficult moment was teaching her to be strong, be patient, and be brave. She remembered the lesson at the center of it all. When something feels too hard, use both hands. Mara woke up the next morning feeling different from any other day in the training course. The air was cool, the sky was clear, and the early light painted the mountains in soft gold. She looked around the camp and noticed how peaceful everything felt. Some of the trainees were already awake, making breakfast or packing their bags for the short hike back to the base camp. Mara sat quietly for a moment, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the trees. It was gentle, almost like a whisper from the mountains. She thought about everything that had happened the day before. She remembered how scared she had felt when the storm hit, how unsure she had been of her own skills, and how she had struggled many times during the training. But then she remembered something stronger: how she had helped the injured trainee, how she had stayed calm, how she had listened to Elias's guidance, and how she had used all her strength and focus to support the team. For the first time, she felt proud of herself in a deep and quiet way. As she packed her gear, she tried the straps on her backpack and noticed that it felt lighter than before. Maybe it was not the bag that felt lighter, but her heart. She had carried fear with her for so long that she thought it was part of her. Now, after everything she had faced, she realized that fear was something she could put down whenever she chose. The group gathered for the final walk back to the base camp. Everyone seemed tired but relieved. The injured trainee, whose ankle was still bandaged, walked slowly with the support of 2 strong sticks. He smiled at Mara when their eyes met. It was a quiet thank you, one that needed no words. She smiled back, feeling warm inside. Elias walked at the front of the group as he always did. His steps were steady and confident, his eyes watching the trail but also keeping track of everyone behind him. Mara walked somewhere in the middle, enjoying the soft crunch of the ground beneath her boots. As they moved down the mountain path, she noticed how much more she saw now. She paid attention to the shape of the rocks, the patterns in the ground, the wind passing through the trees, and the sounds of small animals moving in the distance. It was as if the mountains were speaking to her in a language she was just beginning to understand. Halfway down the trail, Elias slowed his pace until Mara had caught up with him. He said nothing at first. They simply walked side by side, listening to the quiet around them. Mara could feel the weight of unspoken words between them, but she didn't hurry. She had learned that sometimes silence held meaning too. Finally, Elias turned his head slightly and said, "You did well yesterday." The words were simple, but coming from him, they felt like something important. Mara took a breath and replied, "Thank you. I only did what needed to be done." Elias nodded. That is what makes the difference. Doing what needs to be done, even when you are tired or afraid. Mara looked ahead at the trail as she walked. "I didn't think I could do it," she admitted. "I keep doubting myself." "You are not alone in that," Elias said gently. "Everyone doubts themselves at times. The difference is whether they keep going." Mara thought about his words, and after a moment she said, "When you told me to use both hands, it made me think differently. It helped me more than you know." Elias gave her a small smile, the kind that was easy to miss if someone wasn't paying attention. It was not just about climbing, he said quietly. It was about giving all of yourself to the moment, not holding back, not doing only half of what you can. Life asks us to use both hands many times. She nodded. The message felt clearer now than ever before. It was not just a lesson about surviving in the mountains. It was a lesson about living with intention, facing challenges fully, and believing in her own strength. When they reached the base camp, the group gathered near the main building where the instructors waited. The other trainees looked relieved to return. Some sat down on benches, some stretched their arms and legs, and some went to get water from the canteen area. Mara stood quietly, looking around with new eyes. Only a week ago, this place had felt intimidating. Now it felt familiar, even comforting. One of the senior instructors began speaking, congratulating everyone for completing the course. He talked about teamwork, determination, and the importance of staying calm in difficult situations. When he mentioned the incident with the injured trainee, he thanked the group for their support and cooperation. Mara felt a warm blush rise to her cheeks. But she stayed quiet. She didn't need the attention. She knew what she had done, and that was enough. After the announcements, the trainees began to receive their completion tags, small metal pieces with their names engraved on them. When Mara's name was called, she walked forward with steady steps. She accepted her tag and looked at it closely. It was simple and small, but to her, it represented something much bigger. It was a symbol of her growth, her courage, and her new understanding of herself. As she walked away, she saw Elias standing a little distance from the others. He was adjusting the strap on his backpack, as if preparing to leave for another task. Mara approached him slowly. When he noticed her, he paused and looked at her with his calm, steady eyes. "I wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "Not just for yesterday, but for everything. Your guidance helped me more than I can explain." Elias looked at her for a moment before replying. "You listened. Many people hear, but not everyone listens. You took the lesson and made it your own." Mara smiled. "I'll remember it. Not just for climbing, but for life." He nodded once, and then he said, "You climbed your own mountain. That is something no one can take from you." The words settled gently into her heart, like stones finding their place in a river. She realized that this was the true ending of her journey, not just completing a course, but discovering something powerful inside herself. After saying goodbye, Mara walked back to the benches where the other trainees sat. She held the metal tag in her hand and felt its cool surface. She thought about the mountain, the storm, the fear she had faced, and the strength she had found. She thought about how she had arrived feeling unsure and how she was leaving feeling capable. Later, when she finally headed home, she carried her backpack with ease. Every step she took felt steady and confident. The path ahead of her seemed wide, full of possibilities, and she no longer felt afraid of the unknown. She understood now that when life became too hard or too heavy, she had the power to face it fully. She could use both hands. She could use all of herself. As she walked away from the training grounds, the mountains slowly faded behind her, but the lessons stayed with her. The quiet wisdom, the calm confidence, and the deep breath of courage all became part of her. And even though she knew there would be many challenges in her future, she also knew one simple truth. She was ready for them. She had learned how to carry herself through fear and uncertainty. She had learned how to move forward with strength and purpose. Her journey was no longer about surviving a mountain trail. It was about living her life with both hands open, ready to hold, ready to face, and ready to rise.